Chapter 21. We stood outside the empty house and saw a small mushroom cloud in the center of the village. We ran toward it, and I noticed we were in a far corner of the neighborhood. The rain stopped as we ran up the main street toward Rockney's house. He was standing in front of his ruined house, a pile of dead giants in his front yard. When Rockney saw Astrid, his face lit up with a smile. "Oh, thank heaven you're all right." He hugged her tightly. The look of relief on his face made me feel better.
"Ernie's dead,"
she told Rockney.
"We couldn't save him."
"It's okay, my dear. It wasn't your fault. Nothing could be done. I just wish I were here." "Where were you?" I asked, trying not to sound angry, even though I was. He looked at me from the corners of his eyes. "I was in town, grabbing a drink with Victor. Some giants showed up there as well, tearing up Dargo Plaza. They nearly got into the palace before I managed to stop them." "Nowki turned the giants?" Champagne asked as she joined us. "It would appear so." "What does this mean for us?" she asked. Victor waddled up to us.
"Dargo natives attacked us. It reflects poorly on the Dargonians that their own inhabitants sided with the bad guy. Even worse, the giants killed Tolino, the island's king."
"Oh no,"
Astrid said. "Yes," said Rockney. "Hopefully this attack will show Anila that we only want peace for everyone, and that Nowki is a threat that can't be ignored. Or she may blame us for bringing the island to Nowki's attention in the first place," I said. I couldn't help it. I kept thinking of Anila, about how she'd lost her father. I'd never met the man, but still. Rockney stared at me, but said nothing. Astrid stood near Cormac's dead body at the top of the pile.
"How could he betray us like this?"
"Nowki is very persuasive," Rockney said, putting a hand on her shoulder. "There's nothing he won't do to regain power. Nothing is sacred to him." After this attack, my view of Nowki definitely changed.
"No time like the present to talk with Anila, the poor child,"
Victor said as he and Rockney headed for Rockney's car. Before Rockney got in, he waved his hand and the pile of giants slowly began disappearing in an orange glow. Astrid walked up to me.
"I still can't believe Cormac did this. He killed his own father."
"I'm sorry." She shook her head, looking toward the dead pile as embers floated in the air.
"That thing he said to you before he came after me doesn't make sense."
"Why? What did he say?" She looked at me.
"He said, 'Help me.'"
The entire island of Dargo gathered in the palace's courtyard hours later to crown Anila queen. I stood among the islanders, feeling like an intruder. I could see Anila at the top of the grand staircase, wearing a white gown with a very elaborate gold necklace. I'd never seen her in such an outfit, and by the look on her face, she wasn't used to dressing like this. Rhys approached her with a silver crown that rested on a yellow pillow. He stopped next to her, took the crown, and placed it on Anila's head. Anila was now queen of Dargo Island, and she did not look happy. Her face looked like it was made of stone, and it seemed she was holding back her emotions. I guess she'd cried a lot before the ceremony, or was preparing to do so afterward. I felt so sorry for her, and wanted to console her, but considering what happened hours earlier, figured security would be tight around the new queen. Rhys was especially meaner looking. I was only 30 feet away, if I guessed correctly, and for a second she and I locked eyes. I might have imagined it, but she seemed relieved to see me. Then that hard look returned, and she stared at her subjects gathered around me.
"As Queen of Dargo Island," she said clearly, "I promise to rule with integrity and heart, to obey the laws of the land, and to never abuse the power granted upon me."
It was a short speech, and Anila must have memorized it a long time ago, awaiting the day she would have to say it. I couldn't imagine how she felt, having all this responsibility thrown at her. Her father was dead. Ernie was dead. The Bells were dead. Though there was nothing I could have done for Tolino, I felt responsible for Ernie's death. My presence at the gatehouse did nothing to strengthen the barrier around the village, like it was supposed to, and I'd had the chance to save my coworker and friend in Rockney's backyard. Instead, I hid in the treehouse like a coward until it was too late. As the crowd cleared out of the courtyard, I made a decision. I was going to leave Dargo Island and never return. It had been 2 weeks since I'd left the island without saying goodbye to anyone. Well, I told Rockney so he could fill my vacant spot. So much had happened, and I knew I'd never truly forget, but I could move on. I would miss Rockney, Anila, Champagne, Victor, and Astrid, but I just didn't feel safe there anymore. Rockney was sad to see me go, but he understood. He said he'd keep my visitation rights open if I ever wanted to return, but I doubted I ever would. It was good to know I could go back without fear of melting the way Trick did, though. And Rockney let me keep my memory. I still had the amulet that protected me from Nauki, but I rarely wore it. I didn't expect him to bother me anymore, especially if he knew I no longer worked on the island. Estevan and I hung out a lot more, and I could tell he was happy I no longer had that job. He knew it was the same job that killed his grandpa, even though I never confirmed it, but we chose never to talk about it again. He'd made peace with it, partly because he had no proof. Otherwise, the police would be all over it. To be honest, I almost told him everything. I didn't work on the island anymore and didn't care what happened. Being attacked by a melting man and watching a friend having his back snapped by a giant had that effect on you. Christy and her husband got back together and decided it was time they lived alone. Not having a job definitely hurt my ability to pay rent, so I decided to move out. Luckily, my parents lived down the street. It only took 2 days to move in, and I was glad I lived light. Most of my possessions consisted of books and Blu-rays, many of which I'd sold off since quitting my job. Most of my books were on my phone anyway, thanks to ebooks, and I spent a lot of time reading them. I even managed to finish that book I'd spent a year on, with a little help from the audiobook version. Reading the text while listening helped me retain the words. I felt more relaxed than I had in months. I kept the book I'd bought on the island, even though it did nothing but remind me of that place. Whenever I got too relaxed, though, I wondered why the giants were able to enter the village so easily. Why had the barrier failed? It was supposed to be stronger with me there, right? With a human there, I reminded myself. I set down my phone, forgetting the book I'd been reading. I'm human, right? I asked myself. A knock on my door startled me. I told whoever it was to come in. My mom opened the door and smiled at me.
How are you doing, honey?
Good. She closed the door behind her and sat at the foot of the bed.
I've been thinking a lot about what you told me, about the tornado.
About dying and coming back to life, I guessed. She closed her eyes and nodded. I felt bad for phrasing it so bluntly.
I wish you'd told your father and me sooner, but I'm so happy you're okay. I know you're probably wondering what happened that day.
You mean why I came back and that other kid died? I asked.
Yes.
I sat up straighter. Do you know something about that? She nodded again.
There's something I never told you about your birth. When I was pregnant with you, I was also pregnant with another baby.
That hit me hard. I couldn't speak, and I felt my jaw drop. I was supposed to be a twin?
Yes.
I tried to think of something to say. I had more questions, but they all came to mind at the same time. What happened? She sighed.
Your sister died before she could be born. How?
I heard myself whisper. I already knew the answer.
Well, honey, you were so weak and the doctor thought we would lose you. Then, suddenly, you started getting better and your sister got weaker. And then...
I killed her? I finished.
No, not at all.
That's what happened, I said forcefully. I leeched her the way I leeched that guy after the tornado. What am I? Mom shook her head, tears in her eyes.
It's my fault. It's something passed down every second generation. You inherited it from your grandfather.
Inherited what?
You're a Gelfin.
My jaw dropped again. A Gelfin? What's that?
It's a form of parasite. You have the ability to drain the life force from people. You don't have any control over it, and can only do so when your life is in danger.
I'm not human, I finally managed to say.
You are human,
she yelled. Then she covered her mouth in shame.
You're my baby, and there's nothing wrong with you.
Mom, I'm 19. You don't have to protect me. I killed my sister and that guy. I couldn't control it, but that doesn't make it okay. Is there any way to stop doing this?
Not that I know of, honey.
The doorbell rang. I'll get it, I said, and quickly left the room. I had to get away from my mom for a second. She'd kept this secret from me all these years. I was mad. If I'd known sooner, I would have tried not to drain anyone's life force. That poor guy would still be alive. I'd had no right to take his life. My head was still spinning with what Mom had told me, and I walked through the house in a daze. This was why the Bells had told me to talk to her in the first place. They'd known all along what I was, but had wanted me to hear it from her and not anyone else. I answered the front door and was shocked to see Shay standing there. I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen her. What are you doing here? I asked a little heatedly.
I heard about what happened on the island. I wanted to make sure you're okay.
I'm fine. Where have you been? She grinned.
Do you really care?
I wouldn't have asked if I didn't. Man, I was mad and having trouble controlling it. I felt like I should be better than this, but it was difficult.
Well,
she said,
I've been spending time with someone I shouldn't. Someone you've spoken to a few times as well.
I tilted my head. You mean you've been talking to...
Yes,
she said.
I've been talking to the fabled enemy, Nauki.